So I think we should be recording now. Just let me get my screen tidied up. I have a few different things popping up. So I did say on the meeting that we had on Wednesday the same thing, but just to make sure that everyone knows, I'm going to reiterate that it is the same content that I'm covering at both sessions. Obviously, if questions come up, it might be slightly different questions, but if you attended to one or if you watched the recording of the one, the second one is probably going to be the exact same. So don't feel like you have to go through it. Also, I know that I have busy students who watch recordings like at the twice of the speed, which is a good approach. I sound like a chipmunk and you'll get through the material quicker. So that's an option as well. Other thing that I kind of wanted to quickly mention is that, and let me see if I can move ahead with the slides, is that these sessions can take many different shapes and many different forms. Sometimes with some groups, it's more of a discussional. Students come with questions and we tackle those questions. Sometimes it is more of that. There's been multiple times, and it's not a bad thing, that I just hang out here by myself and I just ramble on. And what I have found that often as a starting point is useful is that we go through kind of like highlights, what are the big things that you should have taken away from the chapter. But again, if you do have something and it's not serving your purposes, let me know. And I'm sorry, my cat is all over the place. I'm happy to deliver this session in any way that's useful and beneficial for you. So if something's working, let's keep doing it. But if something's not working, let me know. Once I know, I can change things. Oh, that's great. Let me just jot down her name, because I do try to give extra credit for anyone who's present so that I can
Also, I wanted to say we're seeing a BIO202 presentation.
Ooh. Okay, let me check that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we're looking at the right thing.
Thank you for saying that. Let me just see. I think it might be that I just forgot it there, and it's BIO201. We'll be able to, it's the same content, the initial part, but let me just put down. No, thank you for saying. I think I've used the same slides for years and no one has spotted that. So thank you. It is going to be the same thing in terms of the introduction, and then onwards, it should be the 201 slides. So what I was going to do at the very first was just really quickly introduce how the course is going to work, what the plan is, how the assignments work, and so on. But again, if you do have, if something's too familiar, let's skip it. Or if you do have questions, then let's dive into it in more detail. So just jump in. We have had an icebreaker forum that I think that all of you have participated, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to be totally honest and transparent. That's how I teach. That's how I approach the learning process. I think we're all on the same place. And as honest as I am, it gives you better tools to navigate. Our college has significant concern about these asynchronous online classes in terms of that they want to make sure that these are very interactive. And for that reason, there is a kind of a push towards of having more discussions. I'm a student myself, and all of my, or a big part of my training happens through discussion forums. And I don't always love them. I think that sometimes it is a little bit of performative, especially when there's a requirement that you need to post this many times and have this many responses to your peers. So I try to keep it very straightforward and very simple. But again, remember, you have many ways of earning points. I'm required to offer certain things, and I'm required to offer those certain things. And if they work for you, that's great. If they don't work, then find what is beneficial for you. But knowing the students and knowing where students are planning to go, what their career goals are, kind of helps me to pull up examples. I've been teaching for, I was just counting the other day, and it was kind of depressing, nearly 20 years of A&P classes. So I can tell these stories in many ways, and I can pull examples that are most relevant to you if you tell me what your field is. So I think I have a pretty good handle of the audience here. So I really appreciate you taking part on those. I did want to share real quickly how to get hold of me. I do get a lot of email. Teaching is the reason why I went to this field, and I really enjoy it, but unfortunately it's no longer the biggest part of what I do. So I get pulled to other places and I get a lot of email, and sometimes I forget or I miss an email. So if you want to be certain that I respond to you, using the Canvas messaging is the kind of most accurate way or most surefire way of contacting me. I monitor those kind of almost manically, and I try to respond within 24 hours. If I do take time off during weekends, then it might be 48 hours. If I'm traveling for work-related travel, I would let you know through announcements that during this time period, I'm not available. But if you don't hear back from me in a day, just resend the same message. It's going to populate at the very top of my to-do list. And I will not be offended. It's not rude to send that, hey, here's the same message. You don't even need to put anything different there. You can just keep resending the same one. And eventually I'll make sure that you get an answer. We do have also office hours. And those office hours, I think I put some times on your syllabus. But I'm going to be honest, I'm always in my office if I'm not teaching. So those office hours are accessible through the same link that you joined today. So in my WebEx room. If the room is not open or if it's not available, it's possible that I have a face-to-face student who has joined me. And in that case, just drop me a message. And as soon as they have left, I'll reactivate the online connection to my office room. So I guess that was the kind of biggest things that I wanted to say about that. Any burning questions so far? I don't see anyone manically waving hands. In that case, I'm really briefly going to explain why I'm here and I guess why I'm qualified to teach this class. I realize that you didn't sign up here to hear about my life story, but having done teaching and being a student myself, I do realize that it's sometimes helpful to know from what angle your instructor approaches the material. So I'll share real quickly. Remember that this is not part of the material that you would be tested, so nothing to worry about that. My real job, I guess, in medicine is in cardiology and medical imaging especially. I mainly work with MRI imaging and cardiac MRI imaging. To produce high quality cardiac MRI images, it takes about 2 to 3 seconds from a stationary object that we look at. And we've had these techniques available for us for about 20, 30 years now. And what you see at the very bottom right corner of the screen is a typical image that we would take of the heart with an MRI scanner. So remember that heart sits in a weird angle in your chest. It doesn't really align with any other planes that we have in the body. So that's why you see kind of this disordered view. The chest would be here. These would be lungs, there would be diaphragm, and there would be liver underneath. What you see here is a left ventricle, and then you see right ventricle next to it. And to produce an image like that, we get around the challenge that it takes several seconds by actually taking the picture over a longer period of time and matching it with your EKG trace. What you see and what is the typical approach in MRI of the heart, an MRI is ideal, I guess I should say, for imaging of the heart muscle and heart tissue is because it picks up soft tissue characteristics really well. And what you see is really superimposed image of a couple of acquisitions. And in between those acquisitions, we have then injected a contrast agent to the vasculature of the patient. So through that, we will see that the healthy cardiac muscle tissue shows up as a dark signal. And then anywhere where there's necrotic heart muscle tissue, where the tissue has died, that will show up as a bright signal, as you will see at the lower portion of this image here. So that tissue is dead, it's gone, there's nothing we can do, it's out of the game. Cardiac muscle tissue doesn't regenerate. Once it's gone in this context. So what my research and my research groups that I've been part of, what we're interested is that how could we do more than just tell that where the damage has occurred? And there is an interesting pattern that takes place in a cardiac muscle tissue. And there's some debate whether this does take place in other tissues, and I'll leave that debate for other spaces. But we see that normally most of the fluids in the cell are inside the cell. And that's also the case for the cardiac muscle cells. But about 24 to 48 hours before that tissue is going to die, due to, for example, of starvation of oxygen or nutrients, this could be that there's been a coronary artery blockage or something like that, the water actually moves from inside the cell to the outside the cell to extracellular space. An MRI is ideal for detecting water concentration. And with these maps that you see at the top, T1 and T2 maps, we can actually see that movement of fluids as this larger, brighter signal. So that's indicative that this area is going to die eventually if we don't do any changes. So we see what already has died and we see what will die in the future. So you can see that there's a great predictive value in this imaging modality. It's not in large clinical use yet, but it's something that we're definitely working. And you can imagine that insurance companies are interested, but it's also with every medical intervention that we do, there's risks and there's benefits, and we want to see if all the tissue is already died, no more tissue is going to die. It's probably not worthwhile to put the patient through those risks. But if we see that we can do significant benefits through intervention, then it might be worthwhile. So that's kind of what I'm about, what my interest in medicine is, the kind of research that I've mainly done. I don't get to do as much research these days, unfortunately. I'm more focused on other aspects of working in academia. But that was not my first job. My first job actually was as a conservator restorer. I trained and then worked for many years in museum field with historical objects, a lot with organic materials from burial sites. So that took me a lot to excavation sites. And a lot of the time, these were objects that were buried or ended up being buried with the bodies of humans as they ended up to these sites. While I was doing that job, I realized that I probably should know something about human bodies. So I went back to school. I studied pure anatomy, both under and post-grad degrees, couple of degrees, and that took me to do some work also in the forensic field. How it's organized in the UK is a little different in terms of forensics from the US, and we don't necessarily have as large forensics teams in the police forces. It's more to do with outsourcing these services using universities. Kind of looks good when you have a professor who has done this and this many years of this and that job in a court if you need to have a witness. So I do have some experience from that. There is a good side that you get out of your jury duty because you might be a potential witness, so you can't be really called into jury. So a lot of the time, the questions that we've dealt with that is it a human, is it an animal, those remains that we see? Is it a recent human remains, or is it historical, kind of defining, is it a crime scene? Is it something that we treat more of as a historical thing? But while I was doing that job, another thing that I quickly noticed that you can't really take human remains and chop them up, study them, and then put them back together and say that it's the same thing. I'll use an example of Egyptian mummy. You can't unwrap it just to have a look inside and then wrap it back in and say that, okay, now I know. That would have fundamentally altered the mummy. So that took me back to school, wanting to learn medical imaging and figure out how can we acquire images of these bodies. Really, I guess that I quickly realized that there's more money to be made with living patients than dead patients. So that took me to medical field and medical school, and then teaching also in that area. But there's a lot of basic clinical research, basic applied research that I've done. And I also have been, and I'm still fairly interested in early development of the human body. So from conception, the moment when mother and father make magic, to about 14 days. What happens in that early development of the human body. And there's a lot that we can do then to implement that to benefit the patients and avoid malformities and so on. That has also taken me to teach medical imaging, especially ultrasound. When I came to America, I ended up kind of on a teaching side of the job in academia, in private schools here in Valley. I won't name names of the institution, but in a private medical imaging school, teaching ultrasound, teaching MRI mainly. And I quickly kind of found myself feeling a little conflicted. And I'm not saying that there's one system is better than another, but I was trained in UK, trained in Europe, and kind of have operated more in socialized healthcare system. And one of the challenges that I had students who were paying significant tuition just to pursue a medical career. And I did kind of struggle with the idea that not everyone had that opportunity because it was really defined about their financial background. So when a chance came, when a friend asked me to cover a week of his classes in a community college, I did that, and I really fell in love with community colleges and what community colleges represent in terms of making education affordable and reachable to more people. And ever since then, I've kind of stayed in this sphere, and I'm now, I have a permanent professorship with Chandler Gilbert. I think for me, it is a choice. I do teach in multiple institutions, but I still choose that my main job is in community colleges. So maybe that gives you an idea of kind of where I come from, what I value, what my outlook is. I will really briefly mention that I do get bored really easily. I like to stay busy, so I went back to school some time ago, and now I'm working mainly on doctorate, interested in reproductive law, really medical law, and reproductive ethics. I find that a lot of the legislation that we have around the reproductive topics has been written around the idea that there's a mother and there's a father genetically, and then they produce a child. But we all know that with technologies now that has been challenged, we could have one single individual who produces genetic offspring, or we could have 34 individuals who all contribute to producing their genetic offspring. So that kind of challenges the legislation. Often legislation runs a little bit behind of what's happening in real world. So I'm interested in that. That's why if I give you homework, I have tried to carefully consider that that homework is beneficial. I have tried to carefully consider that it's worthwhile thing for your time, because I'm doing a lot of homework myself. I'm writing a lot of essays. So I hear you, I feel you, and that's why I also give you quite a bit of agency in choosing what is the best way for you to do those assignments or collect the points. I really just need to get enough points from you that you get the grade that you want as a final grade. So that's, I guess, a brief look of why I'm here. If someone has any questions, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'm just going to go to talk a little bit about this course before I move on to the chapter material. In that case, I just wanted to put this slide up on the screen to kind of outline all the things that we're doing this week, or have been doing and will keep doing. And I realized that it looks like a very busy slide. And part of the reason why it looks so busy on these summer courses is that we're actually covering twice the material in a shorter time. So rather than having a full semester, 18 weeks to cover the material, we do it in 8 weeks. So that's why every week we're typically covering 2 learning modules. So you'll often see, for example, for this week, that I have a learning module 1A, and then I have a learning module 1B. So refer back to those if you're kind of confused about the workload. It really is that we just cover the same material in half of the time. So we've been doing syllabus quizzes, we've been doing getting to knowing each other and finding this time for these online meetings. About these online meetings, I will say that I try to facilitate the schedules of everyone, but I know that it's never going to be perfect. These are optional. Like I said, I give extra credit for those who attend, but if you can't attend, there's a recording, and if those don't work for you, there is no requirement. I don't feel offended if you're not around, but I do want to, again, based on that initiative that the college has to have more interaction in these asynchronous courses between the students and instructor and amongst the students, I try to offer these. You'll also see that this week you've been doing chapter 1 and chapter 5. Chapter 1 is really kind of orienting you more generally. I do have a quiz and practice anatomy for those. Those are activities that you'll complete in Connect. And then I have discussion. Those discussions, again, you can share whatever you wish. I probably will give full marks if you just participate. It is a space where you can answer. I give some prompts, but you could just share what you found interesting. Or if you have clinical experience, if you have medical experience, you could totally just share that, hey, I once saw this and it relates to what we're talking about. So it is a space that's a learning space, but it's a space that can look in many different ways based on what you get out of it. Same thing for the quiz and practice anatomy and discussion for chapter 5. There is also for chapter 5 a virtual simulation. So we go to a virtual lab and prepare microscopic slides. I think it's a good thing that since you'll be looking some slides, pictures of slides, you know how those were produced. So that's another activity that's available on this week for you to participate in. So really, I guess that highlighted largely the typical week. What we do quizzes, we do practice anatomies, and we do discussions. Occasionally, I also have those simulations like you've seen this week or will see this week if you haven't had a chance to do that yet. And occasionally, I also have activities that I call food for thought. These are mini essays. I'm looking for about a paragraph that relates. There's usually a prompt that's pretty clear that relates of applying the content from that week to more of a kind of a clinical setting or so on. So that's what you can expect in each module. In addition, at the very bottom of the module, you'll see that there's an area that I've labeled as Want More. That Want More provides kind of a summary and some additional reading resources if you're interested on that very specific topic. You'll find also on that Want More area optional questions. These questions are more kind of clinically oriented and more application-based questions. So the Want More assignments are not required towards your course grade. However, I do sometimes have students who already have been in a medical field for a long time. They might be taking this course just to up their grade or just because they have to do it to have a recent enough grade in their transcript. So for those students, if they find the quizzes and practice anatomy activities kind of boring and there's nothing new, they're not learning new stuff, I encourage that you can use the Want More assignments as kind of a chance to push yourself. They go a little bit above of what the class material is. Students always ask that, well, how much do I need to answer to those Want More questions? Well, it's not really just about the number of answers you provide, it's about the quality of answers as well. So there's not a clear way for me to answer that you answer this and you get this grade. It really depends on what the answer contains. But I give this rule of thumb to every student that if you answered perfectly to every single question on the Want More assignment, you would get same amount of points as you would get from participating into the weekly homework. So quizzes, practice anatomy, discussion, maybe food for thought or lab simulation. So if you again find that they're not providing you enough of a challenge, you do have that option to do the Want More assignments to get more of a challenge. Or alternatively, if you just want to earn extra credit points, you feel like your grade is not quite where you want it to be and you want to bring it up, you can totally submit those Want More assignment submissions. They don't have a due date, so you can even go to more towards end of the course if you want to bump up that grade to those areas and earn those points. So I guess that's what I wanted to say about homework. Any questions about that? Anything I can clarify? In that case, I do have a picture, and I think I made an announcement of this as well. Sometimes students are kind of confused about the quizzes. Those are taken on that Connect platform, which is our publisher's platform, and they're automatically graded. When you're taking those, do make sure that you submit the assignment as well. If you just do it, but you don't submit, the grades won't transfer to the Canvas, your grade book there. The reason why I wanted to show this is that occasionally on those quizzes, you'll see questions where there's multiple correct answers. So here we have a student who has answered to a question, and this is in this week's quiz, that which of the following are functions of epithelial tissue, and they correctly identified that protection is one of those functions. In addition, absorption and sensation. They incorrectly answered that transport would be function of epithelial tissue. That's not the case, but they did correctly not choose the structure building as a function of epithelia. So they lost some points in this activity for this wrong answer. Then they went back, because remember, you get the right answers at the end of each attempt, and they went back and they answered to this quiz, but now they forgot to address that transport, address the transport, but they've clicked accidentally structure building as a function of the epithelial tissue. And that's why they ended up with the same grade on both of these attempts. So sometimes it might feel like, oh, I don't quite understand the feedback. Remember that it doesn't just give you points for giving a right answer, it also deducts points for giving a wrong answer. So reviewing the questions, you have multiple chances. You can retake the quizzes if you wish. So this is again me saying that there's many ways to earn points. It takes your best submission as your final grade for that activity. And I really do encourage you to review once you've taken the activity, your answers and what you get on those. Sometimes students also are kind of surprised that there might be questions that didn't quite get addressed in the lecture material. Consider these quizzes and practice anatomy more as a guided reading activities. So it's not meant that you just watch the lecture material and then you take the quiz and you should know full answers to the quiz. What I say to my students is that lecture material is what gives you a pass, probably a C or a maybe B. But if you are chasing for that A, it might be that you need to do a little bit of additional study and reading while you're doing these quizzes and practice anatomy. But this app, this platform that you're using is really good, that actually it will give you a chance to click for a hint, but also to the textbook and the portion of the textbook where an answer to that question is offered. So use them again as this chance to kind of find what's important of the lecture material, what's important of the reading of the textbook, and kind of guide you as you work through that reading. So I hope that that kind of helps a little bit. Sometimes students struggle with that, so I wanted to put that out there. I also wanted to mention regarding testing, because that is, I'm a student myself. I know that I want that good grade, and now I've shared so far that you have many ways of getting those grades. As long as you get more than 90% of all the points available, you have an A. That's how I approach it. But some students would probably want to hear a little bit about what to expect of the tests as well. So on this course, we have 3 tests. On each test, we have exam and we have practical. That's very common for A&P classes. Exam covers the material that you would basically see in your quizzes. So I tell my students that doing quizzes is the best way to practice for the exam. And for the practical tests, really, the questions are largely from the practice anatomy activities. So again, doing those practice anatomy activities prepares you for the practical. Each test and each practical covers the chapters that we have covered right before that. And once we've covered those chapters and you've taken the tests on those, we won't come back to those again. I don't have cumulative final exam in the interest of time on summer courses. It literally is 3 exams, 3 practicals, and that's it. Now comes a part that I kind of have to be careful how I verbalize this. So if something doesn't make sense, I encourage you to ask me if you're watching in live setting, or if you're watching a recording, you can message me, but I'll try to be as clear as I can. And I trust that you're intelligent people and you can work out what I'm trying to say without saying it. So for our syllabus quiz, you did the right thing by answering to those questions based on syllabus. Syllabus is an important document. We try to follow that. I kind of look at it that the syllabus establishes the standard and we can do some changes if needed. And initially, I like to think that I can trust all of my students, that I don't have any problems with cheating, everything's great. So syllabus is there to avoid issues. And if issues arise, then we refer back to the syllabus. However, I have been in medical field for quite a long time. I'll use myself as an example in a sense that I get 8 minutes with a patient when they come and see me. 6 minutes of those are dedicated to that patient interaction, 2 minutes for taking notes. Are you going to cure and fix someone fundamentally in 6 minutes? That's a thing that we can discuss a little bit further somewhere else. But if I have a patient in front of me and I'm prescribing, for example, a drug, drug prescription is really careful job. There's a lot of new information that comes out on weekly basis about drug interactions. Maybe there might be some contraindications if you have 2 drugs that a patient is on. And when I'm doing something that's that vital, I don't want to rely on my memory and just wing it, that I guess that this works. I go and I double check. Even if I have the slightest of doubt, I double check information. And I think that that's the right thing to do in medical field. And if I afford that luxury to myself, I will afford the same luxury to yourself. So we will start this course, and I hope that we can finish this course with an assumption that in an exam, I'm not going to have to rely on having proctoring mode on. I'm not going to have to rely on having your screens locked or having a camera that's monitoring you while you're taking exam. My exams and my practicals, we're going to try approach where they're all open book. So that's why taking good notes, putting the effort during the study time is going to be beneficial. You want to know if you need to double check something for your testing, then where you will find that answer. And again, I get sometimes students asking that, well, is it okay if I take electronic notes or physical notes? Whatever works for you works for me as well. If you have to look it up from online, you can do so as well. That's how we're going to start until cheating happens, and then we'll change the rules. Having said all of that, both exam and practical, there is a time limit to those. I have never had a student who would run out of time in a test as long as they have prepared for the test. The reason why I have a time limit for the exam and practical is that once upon a time I had a student and it was the last day of the course and they started taking their exam, and 3 days later they were still taking their exam. Obviously that's not ideal for you, it's not ideal for me. We need to finish exams within some reasonable amount of time. So the time limit on the exam is only to prevent that you don't kind of drag it on forever. You will have enough time in an exam and practical to look up occasional question here and there. You won't have enough time to look up every single question on every single exam and every single practical. And I think that that makes sense, and I think that that's reasonable. So as long as you have prepared to an exam, as long as you have prepared to a practical, as long as you know where to find the answers, you'll be good. But I think that that's kind of how I'd like us to start the tests on this semester, and we'll take it along and see how it works out and figure it out. Does anyone have any questions about that? Does that make sense? Did that make anyone anxious, or maybe it made you less anxious?
No, that makes sense. Made me less anxious.
I'm glad to hear that. That's my purpose. I do genuinely feel like you learn better when you don't have to be nervous. So you can focus on taking good notes. You can focus on learning. I am not going to get a bonus if I fail more students. I want you all to succeed. I will say on that as well that I've never failed a student in my class if they have submitted work and if they have put in genuine effort. If they don't put in any effort, then I can't be only one fighting for them to pass the course. They do need to also put in a little effort. But I'm glad that that made sense. So I think we're in a good place, and we're going to kind of move ahead with that plan unless someone really, really protests. I will say I sometimes do get students who say that, well, I think that you're giving too much of a chance for us to earn points in different ways. And I think that you're giving us too much of a chance to check things in an exam. And that's fair. I'm not saying that those students are wrong. What I answer to that is that we have students of many different levels, and we have students of many different learning styles. If you want more of a challenge, by all means, take the exams as closed book. By all means, take the quizzes and practice anatomies as closed book. So I do believe that students should have a lot of agency in their own learning. So that's how I approach it. Hopefully it works for you. If it doesn't work for you, we can figure out things to make it more challenging. But it sounds like we're in agreement that this is a good place.
Yes, we appreciate your flexibility.
Oh, I appreciate you. Just in the interest of
honestly,
time,
I had taken anatomy at I'm a student at ASU,
Yeah.
and I had taken it this past semester, and it was really challenging because they did not give us the opportunities that you're providing us with. It was really cutthroat, and that really puts these nursing students at a hard point because these classes are critical for us, and these grades are very, very, very critical because it's the only way we'll get into a nursing program. So having the opportunity to like have attempts, have the open book, have the open notes, it really puts us at a great advantage, and I totally appreciate you for that.
Well, I'm super glad that you're kind of optimistic and happy about that. I will be honest, I'm a student myself, and I am not here to catch you out. Like I said, I don't get a bonus if students don't pass. My philosophy is that I'm here to help you. I'm here to assist you. Obviously, you do need to learn certain things. But I see every day my most experienced colleagues double checking things. That's what we need to do in medicine. That's what we need to do in healthcare field. So I'm here to be a supporter. I think that we're in a good place. I will also say real quickly, kind of relating to that I don't use a curve in my grading. Oh, thank you. My cat is very needy. I'm sorry that she's showing her backside, but she's just very needy at the moment. But I will say that I don't use a curve in my grading. So sometimes I have students who feel like I need to be super extra in this class because only the most extra will get an A. No, if everyone does well, everyone gets an A. It's not like you're in a competition with your friend. So that's to say that I encourage my students to be helpful to your colleagues. In a discussion forum, if you notice that someone doesn't know an answer and you know it, you can share the answer with them. It's not going to make you look bad or make you succeed any less. I try to be active on those discussion forums, and initially I'm kind of maybe a little too active, but eventually the goal is that you help your friends and they help you. That's what it's about. That's the purpose. So I'm not allowed to force any study groups or any sharing notes, but if you do want to do that, you can. If you don't want to do it, you absolutely don't have to. Perfect. It sounds like we're in a good place. I just want to be mindful of the time, so I'm just going to move ahead. I'll mention again these live online sessions. We're going to try doing it twice a week, but maybe later on we might adjust if there's a need to that. Sometimes students also are like, what are we covering on this course? Well, what we're covering on this course is everything that you see on the screen at this very moment. So we'll be doing some general discussion about anatomy, medicine, medical language. We'll kind of revisit the discussion on what tissues are. And then next week is probably the kind of most revision kind of a week. We'll talk themes that you should already know from your previous studies. We will talk about chemistry of biology, chemistry of life, basic review of what cells are, parts of the cells, and genetics. And the reason why I have that on week 2 is that I want to bring all students to the same starting. Some of you will find next week super easy and just fly through it. And that's great if you do so. At the same time, if you feel like it's been a long time since you've been in a biology class, that's the week to get up to the speed. After that, we get to the real stuff. We'll be covering different systems in the body, typically one per week. So we'll talk about integumentary system, skin, associated structures. We'll talk about bone, and then we'll review the skeleton. So we'll go through most important bones, most important parts of every bone, and talk about articulations as well. We'll move on after that to talk about muscles, first in general, and then reviewing the most important skeletal muscles of your body. Finally, the kind of final third of the course is dedicated for nervous system. We'll review nervous system at general level and then very specific parts of the nervous system, finishing with special senses. And this is how anatomy and physiology is taught based on my experience, mostly in the US. So we use something that's known as a systems approach. So we cover body one system at a time and we move on to the next system. And we hope that at the end, it kind of all comes together and makes sense. I'm going to be totally honest, that's not how I was trained. That's not my background in A&P. I was trained in what's known as a regional approach. So we take a body part, let's say we take upper limb, and we learn everything about that body part. We learned the vasculature, we learned the bones, we learned the muscles, we learned the nerves, and so on, and so on, and so on. So by the time I had spent about, I'm going to say 2 years maybe, in a med school, and I went to clinical rotations, they were like, what do you know? And I was like, I know head, neck, and upper limbs, nothing below. I don't know if it's perfect, but it's just to show that there's different ways of learning. This is how we're learning. But because I'm always worried that when we do the systems approach, students miss these interconnections of the systems, I'll try to emphasize those. So you'll see that I'm kind of maybe overly eager about highlighting that no system exists on its own. Everything's interconnected. We've already talked about those exams. I try to have more exams than less exams. So even if one exam doesn't quite go your way, you still can get a good grade. And remember, I do have due dates. Those due dates, I'm generally pretty flexible about those. The only exception is the exams, and especially at the end of the semester, I do need to finish when the semester ends. I can't continue beyond that. If you do miss a due date, message me. I'll be more than happy to work with you and we can figure it out if I could extend that. Having said that, I also realized that many of you have a lot of things going on in your life. This is not the only thing in your life. So if you know that you are having a week that you're going to be super busy, nothing prevents you from working ahead on that week's material. I'll be happy for you to do so. I might not be as quick at grading those because I typically only grade the week that we're going through at that time, or you might not get as complete feedback if you work ahead of the time, but you totally can do so. Only thing that I ask in terms of keeping up with the college's requirements is that I hear something from you every week. So if you go on and bust through all of these assignments early, make sure that you're still engaged with the course at least once a week. That's a requirement for us to keep you enrolled. So I hope that that makes sense. Again, if you have any questions, jump in. Otherwise, I kind of approach it in a wedding approach. So if there's no opposition, I assume everyone's good with moving ahead with that. Perfect. I've mentioned the syllabus in passing a few times. I think that actually, and I know that this shows 202 outline, but it's the same. I think the syllabus button is actually at the bottom of the screen this time around, but it is a really helpful resource. I think I see a hand, I'll come right to you in a second. I think syllabus forms kind of a contract at what I expect and what you can expect. Yes, I saw hand coming up. Any questions?
Yeah, that's from me. So on the syllabus, after I took the syllabus quiz, I just wanted to go back to it because I was going to write down a date from it. And now it's saying when I hit the syllabus, error could not verify ID token, state not found.
Ooh, okay. So it says that in a quiz or in a syllabus?
Yes, it says on the syllabus because I was just going to go back to it because I had saw that I just wanted to write something down from that and I went back to it.
I appreciate you sharing it with me. I'm going to try to answer to that, and I'm going to do what I try to be, which is being really honest.
Okay.
And if that doesn't work, then let me know. The syllabus is a hot mess. It takes about 2 hours for me to prepare it because we do it on a third-party system, and you cannot copy what you've done before every time you write it from zero. And there's all kinds of issues. It breaks down, and I'm not surprised of what you're saying. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to download it as a PDF file and upload it on your week 1 materials. I'll make
That would
probably
be
an announcement.
phenomenal.
Perfect. And it's probably going to get fixed, that issue that's there. But
Okay.
I just don't know. It's like planets have to be aligned perfectly that it works. So
Okay.
it's
Yeah,
nothing
that
to
would
do
be
with
phenomenal.
you.
Yes.
Perfect. I will upload
Thank
it right
you so
after
much.
this class. No,
Thank you.
thank you for letting me know. I kind of feel embarrassed that I have to say, but that's where
No,
we're
no,
at.
you're totally fine. I know there's always problems with technology. I totally understand. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of it, so that other students aren't having the same problem that I was.
Yeah, thank you for saying, because I guarantee that there's at least in class of this size, at least 5, if not more, other students who are just too shy to say anything.
Right.
So I appreciate you.
Uh-huh.
Perfect. So I'll do that right after this class. I do want to use this screen also to show the inbox. That's where I said that please message me through that if you can, just because I check those like every hour during the working week. Not at night, but I check those really obsessively. So if you want to reach out to me, I encourage inbox. Having said that, and having just spoken about syllabus, I do know sometimes things happen, like Canvas goes down and it might be time to take an exam. Please message me if that happens. You can message me then through email. You can, whatever works for you. I will not penalize you if there's technical issues. I will figure it out with you. Don't stress. I will also be honest that most of my assignments, I put the due date at the end of the week on Sunday, 1 minute before midnight. And I'm normally not awake at 11:58. So if something happens and you can't submit a work, just send me a message. We'll figure it out on Monday. And just because things went down and you didn't hear from me, it's not your fault. As long as there's some kind of an attempt, I can figure it out with you. Perfect. I think I will skip through this slide because we've already talked about really making sure that you're able to access the Connect is important, and you do not need a login password or a link from me. It should be automatically connected to your Canvas course. So once you click one of those assignments, quizzes or practice anatomies or simulations, it throws you there. If this is your first time using Connect, you might need to register there. But after that, it's there. And that's where you'll find your electronic course textbook as well. I'll mention real quickly, because I do have sometimes students who are super busy, for example, drive a lot. If you don't have time to read a textbook, one of the things that the textbook provides it as an audiobook for you. I actually live in Tucson and I teach here in the Valley, so I listen to audiobooks all the time. So consider that as a resource that's available for you as well. I think we already talked about the grade. Like I said, any way you earn the points, you just earn them, and let's move on with our live. The next slide, I'm partially required to talk about this, and partially I do actually care about this stuff. So I'm going to mention it, and we'll get to the lecture material in just a second. But when we talk about disabilities, students often tell me when I ask, what is a disability, that they're like, oh, someone's missing legs or arms or things like that. But remember, there's also a lot of invisible disabilities. There's a lot of things that you can't see, but someone's experiencing. And this institution is committed, partially because of ADA, but partially because we just care, to the fact that if you do have a disability, you will still be able to succeed in our courses. I'll use myself as an example again. I did not realize until I was in my 30s and I was doing my second postgrad that I have very severe dyslexia. That's why you'll never see me writing on the go anything on the board. But I realized that I have very severe dyslexia, and that's why also I let you use your notes in spelling things in anatomy practicals, because I can't spell most of the things just because the letters keep moving to me. Looking on hindsight, probably would have been smart of me to figure out that and get some help because I would not have failed every single spelling exam, especially in anatomy, if I had known that it's not really that I'm dumb or it's not really that I'm just lazy, it's that I have a disability. So if you do have any documented medical documentation of a disability, and if you don't have to make documentation, I know someone who could probably provide you one. As long as you have that, we can grant you an accommodation plan. How the accommodation plan works is that you contact our DRS, Disability Resource Services. They will work with you, they will review your documentation, and they will make up a plan what you need in order to have equal chance to succeed in this class. And most often that includes things like having more time in exams or assignments or things like that. Sometimes if this was a face-to-face class, it could be that you can take exams in a less stressful environment and things like that. But I will never know what your disability is. All I will get is a message from the Disability Resource Services that do these accommodations for this person. And I'll do them. We'll never talk about it. I'll never call you out. It's going to be all confidential. One caveat to notice is that we can't grant disability accommodations retrospectively. So only from the moment when you apply them and you get those approved, they apply. You can apply them even on the last day of the semester. But my recommendation is that if you think that you might need accommodation plan, get it in place as soon as you can. You don't have to use it. You can just have it at your back pocket, and it applies to all other classes as well. But just kind of sharing that as a resource. On that note, you know, I love law. I go to law school. I often talk to my students about, is a pregnancy a disability? It's not, but high-risk pregnancy would be. How do you tell apart high-risk pregnancy from normal pregnancy? That's debatable. Also, Title V would cover you if you are a parent, and that's impacting your ability to participate in this class differently from someone who's not a parent. So there's a lot of support available for you, is what I'm saying. And I'll leave it to that. The very last slide I think that I have about this getting started is that, like I said, I'm not here to catch you out. I don't get a bonus for making students fail. So if you put in the effort, I will match that effort. I really do want you to get those grades that you need. Like you shared earlier on, I think that most students are here because they need that grade for something. And I don't get a joy of you not succeeding and meeting your goals, but I do need you to put in a little bit of effort towards that. So that's kind of all that I had in terms of how the course works. I know that it was a large section of our time today, but does anyone have any questions about any of those aspects before we jump into the chapter materials and highlighting the most important things from this week's chapters? I don't hear anyone, but you're still welcome to. It's not like you only had that moment. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and open the next presentation on the background. But if you do have a question, just jump in and share that question and we'll figure it out. In the meantime, I'm just clicking around and opening the next presentation. So like I shared at the very beginning, I kind of look at this in a way that these review sessions, I'll try to highlight the most important elements of that chapter's material. Also, the most important elements that I feel like haven't came up or haven't been clear based on what we've been doing together in an online class. So it might be that I don't cover everything. It might be that sometimes I cover everything. And I realize that there's again that BIO202 hiding there on the background. I'll fix them for the next time, but this is for this class. So let's have a look what we had on week 1 and what were the kind of important things to take away from there. I think most of you were really comfortable with defining anatomy and physiology. Most of you were very comfortable with concept of homeostasis. I know students are sometimes like, why do you always talk about that? I talk about homeostasis because we will literally use that homeostatic feedback mechanism loop that I showed you as a way to explain most body systems. So normally I would have all kinds of check-ins and make sure my students are doing well. We're just going to move ahead in the interest of time, and we're going to talk really quickly about anatomical position. So I shared with you earlier on that part of my previous jobs has been working with forensic field. And often when we have bodies that we deal with in forensic setting, those bodies might not be perfectly positioned. They might be in very weird positions. They might be missing parts, or parts might be detached and spread out over a larger of an area. If we try to write medical notes about those bodies and describe where the injuries or where the signs of something are present in those bodies, it would become very, very difficult very quickly. And for that reason, we have a standard that in medicine, we always talk about a human body that we're talking about as if it was standing in an anatomical position. So even if the body is not really in this position, we don't care about that. We're still going to assume, we're still going to behave and describe the parts of the body as if it was in an anatomical position. So anatomical position is you standing upright, feet side by side, your hands on your sides, palms facing forward, looking straight towards of the individual. So the anatomical position gives us our basic kind of reference that we're going to work against. And one thing to notice regarding the anatomical position is also when we describe things in medicine as being either left or right, it's always the left and right of the patient, not yours, but the patient's right or patient's left. So I hope that that's kind of a clear concept that's going to come very, very important later on as we move ahead. There were a couple of questions also on the discussion forums about the terms axial and appendicular. Really, the axial and appendicular are going to become more prevalent and more visible to you as we talk about different systems. For example, skeleton or muscular system, we often divide body into axial and appendicular parts as we review those. So axial parts cover your head, neck, and trunk. Appendicular parts are instead your upper and lower limbs. And there is some kind of room there to figure out when we look at, for example, bones that you have to pay attention. But the rule of thumb that I give my students is that consider axial parts as the parts that are protecting and parts that where your most vital organs are. So your brain is surrounded by a skull, your heart, lungs, even your abdominal and pelvic cavity are partially protected by the hips. They are all parts of the axial body. Appendicular instead is, and I kind of as a non-native English speaker approach it this way, when I file an application somewhere, for example, I have that actual application, and then I have appendixes to that. Appendixes are additional thing that adds extra information. They're not needed really to stay alive, but they're definitely helpful there. So that's one way to kind of define those two terms. So just if that feels overwhelming at this point, don't let that freak you out, but I hope that that kind of clarifies it. We will come back to these multiple times. Also, I saw some students saying that these regional terms were a lot to take in, and I'm not going to disagree with you. It's a lot to take in when you first start. We have layman's language, and then we have more medical language. These terms will become much more familiar to you more you study A&P. So I wouldn't freak out if you can't remember these all right now. You'll notice as we go through, for example, skeletal system, that a lot of these body parts are named based on the bones that are located on those areas. So it's kind of one of those things that scaffolds and stacks up on top of each other. So more you learn, more these will start making sense. But again, if you are totally unfamiliar to those, I would recommend that in an exam, you at least know where to find the answers. I was answering on a discussion forum earlier today, and I was saying that if you feel overwhelmed about this strategy that works for me when I study law, I study terminology that's new to me and just memorization, print it out and put it somewhere where you know that you will see it often, whether it's at the wall of your office, next to your monitor, at the door of your fridge, or next to your bed. And when you go past, just learn one thing every time. That's going to help you to kind of go through those in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. And like I said, more you study A&P, more these will become clearer. So there's a lot of regional terminology, but again, don't let that put you off. Then we got to these planes of the body. And these planes of the body are what we often use when we discuss or we show structures that are internal structures. We can't just cut the body and say that, look at it. We kind of need to give some anatomical landmarks to the patient or to the viewer of the material that they know what they're actually seeing. So that's where these three planes become particularly important. So we have our medial plane. Medial plane divides your body into right and left. It can also be called sagittal plane, same term, or same thing, just different terms. We can also have mid-sagittal, which is right on in the middle of this division of left and right. Or you can have a sagittal plane that's not right on the middle, it's just on a mid-sagittal then. We also have our frontal plane. Frontal plane divides you into the front and back side. Other word that's being used for that is coronal plane. How I think of the coronal plane is I come from UK, or I lived in UK for a long time. We love our royal family there. So think of how you put on a crown on your head, and where your hands come down is where your coronal plane is going to run down. So dividing to the front and back. And then you have your transverse plane, which divides you to the top and bottom part. It can be referred also as a horizontal plane. But knowing these planes is going to be really helpful and really useful. And again, these will come up time and time again, but eventually I'll start assuming that you just know what I mean when I use these terms. There is also a fourth plane, but I didn't want to put it here, so I didn't want to overwhelm anyone. But we do have oblique plane, which is a plane that simply doesn't align to any of these other planes. For example, when we started by looking at the heart, we saw that those sections of the heart that we looked at on MRIs were taken on an oblique plane in relation to the entire body. So I hope that that makes sense. On this chapter, we also covered some of the directional terminology. And again, I heard few students saying that that was something that they need to look back to. So I thought that no time like now to highlight those. You actually do have this same diagram, and most of the diagrams that I give to you are drawn by me. So you have that available there if you want to print it out, if you want to color, if you want to label. So I'll use that just to give you that kind of consistency. So the term superior means towards the top, and inferior means towards the bottom. So one way to think about it is that think of when you go to the work, and you have a boss at work. That boss at the work is your supervisor. Your supervisor is higher above than you are in the hierarchy of positions at that job. So that's the superior. Inferior, it is lower. I guess I see that we sometimes use it that some products or some things are described as being inferior, so maybe lower than where you're at. But in anatomy and physiology, they're simply directions, superior and inferior. One thing that you'll notice about these directional terms is that we often use them in relation to something. So we would, for example, have two structures that we describe. We could say that your nose is more superior than your chin, or your chin is more inferior than your nose. So I don't think that there's anything other than just getting comfortable with those terms. We also have terms anterior and posterior. Anterior means towards the front. Posterior means towards the back. So anterior, your nose is more anterior than your ear, or your spine is more posterior than your heart. So again, they are relational terms. It's just important that you get comfortable using those directional terms. We also have term medial and lateral. Medial means towards the midline of the body, and lateral means away from the midline of the body. So in this context, we could, for example, say again that your nose is more medial than your shoulder. So again, kind of relational things, you just need to kind of get comfortable with using those. Then if we talk about limbs especially, we'll see terms proximal and distal. these are referring in relation to the starting point of that part. So in starting point of my upper limb, my shoulder is more proximal than my palm. My palm will be more distal than my elbow. So I hope that that kind of makes sense in terms of, again, that nature of relationship of these structures. I will add to this that sometimes it's not quite as clear as the proximal and distal in relation to the limbs. I sometimes use proximal and distal also when I describe, for example, a blood vessel. Let's think of a coronary vessel that runs on the surface of the heart. The proximal part of that vessel is close where that vessel started, and distal part is further away. So again, we can kind of see that the damage of a coronary artery blockage would depend, is it a proximal blockage or is it far distal into that vessel? So I hope that that makes sense in there as well. I did want to also introduce the terms cranial and caudal. It is noteworthy that in humans, in animals that stand on 2 feet, cranial would refer to superior and caudal would refer to inferior. So cranial means towards the head, towards the skull. Caudal means towards the tail. So you remember that we have a tail. But now if we have an animal that moves on 4 legs, cranial would be actually their anterior and caudal would be actually their posterior. So you'll notice that we have these terms, and sometimes it might seem redundant that we have these terms, but we do have a reason why we have these terms in this order or in this manner. So I hope that that makes sense. Does anyone have any questions about those so far? I do have one more, I think, or 2 more, I think. I think this one created some discussion on the discussion forum, the terms supine and prone. So let's start with the simple part. So supine in relation to your hands, in relation to your palms, refers when your palms are facing forward. How I think of it is that I think of supine is how your palms would be when you're carrying a bowl of soup. Prone instead means that now your palms are facing backwards. But this is not the only way how we can look at prone and supine. We can look at these also in relation to the entire body. And I think I shared on the discussion forum of someone when we compared whether they sleep, whether they would be a belly sleeper or sleeping on their back, whether they're in supine or prone position. So supine when you're sleeping on your back, when you're sleeping on your belly, you're in prone position. So those again are things that more you use them, more it's going to start making sense. And the very last one here that I had was something being superficial, so close to the surface, or something being deep, so further into the body. You can say of someone that they're a very superficial person. They only care about what's visible at the surface. They're not a deep person. So I hope that those do make sense. I do realize that it's a lot of terminology if you've never seen those before, but I do think that they are so important and we use them so much that it's worthwhile to get comfortable with those. If you do have any questions, just shout out. If not, I'm going to point out from this chapter also one more thing that I don't think showed up as much in discussion, so I want to highlight those. One of the themes that we see throughout the AMP courses 201 and 202 is that your body is divided into compartments. So these compartments can be grouped in 2 different ways, but the way we're going to group them is grouping them into dorsal and ventral compartments. Dorsal compartment, remember it was towards the back in this case, that covers your cranial cavity and your vertebral cavity. Cranial cavity is where your brain is housed. So it's protected by the cranium, the bones of the skull that are around the brain. And then you have your vertebral cavity, which is formed by your individual vertebrae. Your spinal cord runs inside it, protecting it. So that's the second part of the dorsal body cavity. In terms of the ventral body cavity, those are more towards the belly side. And we can divide them in two different ways. We can divide them into thoracic cavities, so your chest cavity where your heart, lungs, all that good stuff would be protected by the ribs. Then you have your diaphragm, that thin sheet of muscle, main respiratory muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from abdominal cavity. Abdominal cavity where your guts are, your digestive system largely located, and so on. And then you have your pelvic cavity. This image is a little misleading, that it makes you think that pelvic cavity is anatomically separate from abdominal cavity. Actually, there's no clear boundary there, but we do call that pelvic cavity. That's where you would house things like your reproductive organs that are internal, or your urinary bladder, things like that. We can also further subdivide your thoracic cavity into a pericardial sac, where your pericardial space, where your heart sits inside, your pleural cavities, where your lungs are, and the mediastinum, where you would see, for example, the great vessels passing. Students sometimes ask me, why do I care about body cavities? Why I need to learn about those? So I'll try to give you an answer, but you will probably see different answers from different people. But how I approach the body cavities is that they serve as purposes of separating different parts of the body from other parts. You can kind of do an analog with a cruise ship, and how you have those watertight doors and watertight walls that's compartmentalize that cruise ship, so that if there's a leak somewhere in the body of the cruise ship and water flows in, it doesn't spread everywhere in the ship. It's contained within that compartment. So similarly, these body cavities, not only they provide support for the structures inside that are vulnerable, like I mentioned, the skull for the brain or rib cage for the lungs, heart, but they also help us to separate if there's an infection spreading through the body, that it doesn't necessarily spread out as wildly. We can kind of compartmentalize it. For example, heart muscle, since I'm cardiologist, I often refer to that. Heart muscle, if it would get highly inflamed, that would interfere with the functions of the heart muscle, and that would be a major issue. So that's why we put heart inside this sac, which was a pericardial sac. We compartmentalize it so that it's protected, so that the inflammation cannot spread there. So that's kind of how I would frame these body cavities. We can also do other divisions. We're here looking at the abdominopelvic region, and we see that in clinical practice, often it wouldn't be sufficient if I describe that the patient reports pain on their belly region. Belly could be anywhere. It's kind of a unclear term. So rather, we divide the abdominopelvic cavity in one system into quadrants, so 4 parts, and we named an right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, left lower quadrant, and right lower quadrant. And based on describing where the pain in the patient is, we can actually start to figure out what organs we're talking about. So for example, liver and gallbladder would be located at the right upper quadrant largely. Your stomach would be more present at the left upper quadrant, your spleen as well. Your right lower quadrant, appendix is a good example of a structure there that might give us a pain, that might give us issues. And then from lower left quadrant, I guess I could say sigmoid colon as an example. So sometimes we need to have these ways of having more specific ways to describe what's going on. We can do even better. We can actually divide this abdominopelvic cavity into 9 regions, which gives us even more precision when we're describing where the patient is reporting a pain or an issue or so on and so on. So this brings me to the end of the chapter 1. I do realize that I've kept you a long time here, but I do want to pause at this point and check, does anyone have questions about chapter 1?
No, I don't.
Okay, sounds good. I do appreciate you still being here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to open one more presentation and we'll fly through it hopefully quickly. It's the chapter 5. I don't think there were as many confusing concepts, but just for the sake of being complete, I'm going to try to share a little bit of that as well. But as always, at any stage, if you have questions, just jump in, unmute yourself, ask, and we'll take it from there. But here we're talking about tissues. So when we talk about tissues, and you should be able to see the screen again, and if for some reason you don't, just let me know, but otherwise I'll just assume that we're good. When we start talking about tissues, I wanted to start by highlighting, kind of as a reminder, and sorry, I'm going to have to click around to get my pointer to come up, that we can study both anatomy and physiology on many levels. We can study microanatomy, we can study molecular physiology, or we can study also in scale of a cell. Cell is the single unit of life, self-sustaining structure often, and cells form tissues. And then, of course, tissues and so on, we form organs, organ systems, organisms, and then we can look at even bigger of a scale. But next week, we'll spend some time talking about the cells. Cells were the basic fundamental unit of life. That's what we're focusing on. That's what we're kind of talking more about next week. But I want to focus on tissues. So tissues are formed by multiple cells coming together. But first, let's put everything into a scale so we can study again life in many scales. And typically in these classes, when we are studying things, we would be studying things that are small with light microscopes. Light microscopes look at thin slices of a specimen. Typically, we stain those slices, those tissues in those, and then we beam a light beam through it and see different structures and can see a lot. Light microscopes are relatively cheap. They're easily available. We can see cells really nicely. We can see parts of the cells really nicely. On the naked eye, I guess the largest that you would see is the cell, maybe nucleus of the cell, but that's about it. So light microscope allows us to look at smaller stuff. If we need to go to even more smaller stuff, we resort to electron microscopes. One of the challenges with light microscopes is when we look at very, very small structures is that light actually doesn't travel as a straight line. Light can bend depending on properties. So electron microscopy addresses that when we look at the small stuff. So instead of light being used to view the specimen, we shoot electrons, one component of an atom, to that specimen, and we can produce a picture. Often these electron microscopes are very expensive in a scale of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we don't have those available for every student or even every classroom. They're fairly heavily used in most institutions. So there's like a wait list. Typically electron microscope images that we produce, they're black and white, and we see them being colored to highlight structures. They're those that you see when you look at the surface structure, for example, of a virus or bacteria or microorganism, things like that. But now we get back to where I was going to start. So study of cells is known as cytology, where a study of multiple cells coming together and forming a tissue is known as histology. And histology, I've done some amount of histology. It's a lot of preparing samples and a lot of staining samples. So you can see, often you wouldn't be able to see these structures on a tissue as well if you didn't use a stain to highlight different elements differently. So that's something to kind of keep on mind in relation to those. Preparing histological slides, it's a lot of work. So when my students are using microscopes, and sometimes they're a little wild and they hit the slides with the microscope lenses, that's the reason why my face-to-face classes, I make students prepare their own slides initially, so they learn to value and respect their slides, how valuable they are, how much effort goes into preparing to them. And that's why you're going to be doing also that simulation of how to prepare a slide in this week's classes. So we already talked about the tissues are a group of similar cells. They share similar structure, similar function. They're often located in the same area. Obviously, we have some tissues that are located in different parts of the body, but that tissue in the same area shares a lot of similarities. So we already talked about histology, study of tissues. There are four basic tissue types: are epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscle tissues, and nervous tissues. But there's a lot of subgroups to each of these. So we're going to have a look of each of these first very generally and then in a little bit more detail. Epithelial tissues typically form kind of sheets and cover structures. Skin would be a really good example of an epithelial tissue. They form these boundaries between areas. For example, our skin keeping things that need to be inside, and things that need to be outside. They protect structures, form protective layers, and often play important role also in passage of materials across them through secretion, absorption, filtering, things like that. Connective tissues do what it says in the tin. They connect body parts. Sometimes this can be a physical connection, like bones connecting different parts, or tendons, ligaments. But sometimes the connection can be physiological connection, like in case of a blood. Blood is a type of connective tissue. It connects by transporting materials from one part to another. They also play an important role in supporting, binding, protecting structures. Muscle tissues, I sketched on the last class a couple of pictures. I have better pictures coming up. But muscle tissues, really the big thing is that when muscles contract, they create movement. And we have three main categories of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle, and we'll have a look of those. And finally, the nervous tissue is what our final third of the course is dedicated towards the very end. Important portion of the brain, spinal cords, nerves that we find in the body, really facilitating internal communication in your body. And again, we'll see a picture of different parts of it in a second. Does anyone have questions at this point? If not, I'm going to expand a little bit about each of these tissues and then we'll wrap up. I'm keeping an eye of the time. I think that we're not going to take too much longer, but just for the sake of completedness. So epithelial tissues, or epithelium is the other word that you see being used. They really are these sheets that form covering of surfaces or cavities. Also, glands would fall within this tissue group. So things like skin, intestines, mucosa, salivary, sweat glands are some of the examples. And there's many functions that go with epithelial tissues. I've listed there protection, absorption, filtration, excretion, secretion, and sensory reception as well. Partially that falls within these epithelial tissues. So a lot going on in there. But what I really wanted to highlight on this chapter 5 was the way to classify epithelial tissues. And we can classify them in few ways. And let's start here on the left-hand side of the screen. We can classify epithelial tissues when we're studying them based on the number of layers that we see. So if it's just a single layer of cells, we describe it as a simple epithelia. If it's multiple layers of cells, we call it stratified epithelia. So that's the first part. But we also describe the shape of these cells when we describe epithelia. So squamous ones are kind of these flat scale-like cells, really ideal for passage of materials through them. So absorption and filtration are really important. So the movement of the materials through them. Cuboidal epithelia kind of looks like cubes, like dices. And then we have our columnar epithelia, where we have these pillar-shaped cells. And again, these can be either simple or these can be stratified. And different organs, different parts of the body have different needs for different types of epithelia. What I did want to show here as well was the fact that sometimes we see also what's described as pseudostratified epithelia. So we knew that stratified meant multiple layers, but pseudo means kind of like a fake. So we might see pseudosciences like reading tea leaves or talking about planets and their effects on your personality, things like that, horoscopes. So pseudo means that it's a fake stratified. So in reality, it's just a single layer of cells, but it looks like it would be multiple layers because the nuclei and the shape of the cells makes it appear as such. But in reality, it's just one layer. So that's another term that I wanted to say. We do have transitional epithelia as well, where they're not clearly one or another, they're moving from one area to another. I did also want to say a couple of words about the glandular epithelium. Really, I guess that the big thing there to take away is the fact that glands are responsible for producing secretions. And then we can study this further. One of the main divisions of the glands is that we can classify glands either as endocrine or exocrine. So endocrine glands produce hormones. They're this gland that you see on yellow on this picture, and they release these hormones to a bloodstream, and they travel these hormones into bloodstream just throughout the entire body. Exocrine glands instead are the glands that students often think, for example, when we think of the sweat glands or tear glands or salivary glands. They do have a clear gland portion that produce that secretion, and then they have a duct. And through that duct, they release the secretions locally. So I've sketched here a gland, and you see the duct, and it releases the secretions nearby where that gland is located. So I think a salivary gland is a really good example. We have a couple of extrinsic salivary glands. They have a duct, and all of those ducts open to the mouth, so they're localized on the same area. But remember, endocrine glands and hormones didn't have to be on the same area where they're at, and they don't have ducts. We can also classify glandular epithelia further based on the number of cells that are involved, and I'll let you kind of unbundle that if you're interested. I did want to talk a little bit about connective tissues. So again, connective tissues, they connect body parts, they provide binding, support, and protection. They can do things like insulate. I think fat tissue adipose tissue is particularly good example of that. Similarly, in terms of storing energy in those fat tissues, transportation as well when it comes to the blood. That's a good example of connection in that sense. We do classify connective tissues into 4 main groups: connective tissue proper, cartilages, which are characterized as kind of they can vary again from firm to kind of flexible, whitish materials, bone, and then the blood as a special type of connective tissue. I don't think that I had too much here. The connective tissue proper, we would find, for example, at the lungs, at the fat cells, tendons, ligaments, cartilages. I think tendons and ligaments are particularly good ones. In terms of the bones, we have 2 different classifications of the bones that we'll get to talk about later on. Compact bone and spongy bone, how solid the bone material is. And then the blood will unbundle different components of the blood in BIO202, different cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, and also the platelets. But one big thing that I wanted to show that's kind of shared by all connective tissues is that they do have this matrix, this extracellular matrix, where we then find other things. We find fibers, we find cells. So even though connective tissues are so varied, they do have shared characteristics. Moving onward to the muscle tissues, we talked about how muscles create movement. There's a rich blood supply to muscle tissues for that reason. And some muscle tissues are voluntary, some of them are involuntary. So when I talk about voluntary, I'm referring that you have a conscious control over them. In involuntary ones, it's more automatic reactions that you'll see. So let's have a look at the 3 different types of skeletal muscles that we mentioned and touched upon earlier on. Let's have a look at them on a cell level. So here we see skeletal muscle cells. Skeletal muscle cells are cylindrical in terms of their shape. They typically have multiple nuclei, and often my students are confused. How is that possible? Well, that's possible because actually skeletal muscles, when they form, they're multiple cells fusing together. So that's how we end up in multiple nuclei. There's very characteristic striation on these skeletal muscle cells, these stripes, and they are under your voluntary control. So it is these skeletal muscles that we'll be talking about when we review the most important muscles that we can study on a gross anatomy level in the body a little later on this course. Then we, of course, have our cardiac muscle cells. Unbundling them and figuring out their characteristics, let's think of what's the function of the heart. Well, function of the heart is to pump blood. And in order to do that, we need every single cell on that area to contract simultaneously. So that's why cardiac muscle cells are these branched cells that connect to many other nearby cells, so they can kind of do that uniform function. And they do have these bands at the very end where the cells connect to other cardiac cells, which are known as intercalated discs. Intercalated discs facilitate easy movement of materials from one cell to another. Other characteristic of cardiac muscle cells, one central nucleus and those striations that run through. And obviously cardiac muscle cells are going to be under involuntary control. You don't need to wake up in the middle of the night just to remember to take a heartbeat. It happens automatically. And finally, our smooth muscles, they're often these spindle-shaped cells. They can change shape quite distinctly depending on what they're doing. There's no striations, so they're clear. They have one central nucleus. And again, involuntary. We would see smooth muscle cells, for example, around your blood vessels and also in the intestinal system, digestive system, regulating some of those tube-like structures there. I think that that's all I wanted to say about muscles. And let's finish off. I'm simply going to mention nervous tissue at this time because we will spend so much time talking about it later on the course during the final third of the course. But neurons are our nerve cells. And what they do, they really are responsible for passing messages, so regulating body functions. We will see neurons, especially within the brain and spinal cord that form our central nervous system, and then in our peripheral nervous system as nerves. For the nervous tissue, we can see different parts. We see the cell body, we see dendrites. Dendrites are kind of like antennas that collect information that gets processed at the cell body. And then we have an axon that runs out of there to the axon terminal that then connects to the next structure. We can also see myelin around the axon, but all that stuff we'll get to talk about later on this course. I've mentioned neurons so far, but I do want to mention when we talk about nervous system also the glial cells. Neuroglia are supporting cells. What they do, they kind of physically and also physiologically support the nerve cells, and both structurally but also providing materials to maintain those nerve cells alive. And that is an interesting discussion. For example, a lot of our early research to Alzheimer's focused on thinking that there's something wrong with neurons, and we have now found out that it's actually a condition that impacts your glial cells, not the neurons themselves. So sometimes we see that we study wrong thing in sciences as well. So that brings us to the very, very end of everything that I had planned to cover today in terms of the what the course is about, and in terms of what's to know about the main highlights of the two chapters that we've been talking about. I don't think that I have too much of anything else groundbreaking to share. The very final thing that I'll do, just to kind of check on myself that I've remembered to do everything I need to do, is to share my screen, and let's see if I can do it correctly. This might not work out great. I'm not sure what screen I'm actually sharing. Let's not do it this way. Let's see if I can make it work. Well, I was going to share our announcements, and I think it came up, our announcement from a couple of days ago. So I'm probably a little overactive on those announcements, sharing those at the beginning of the course as when we get going and everyone gets all of their questions answered. I do promise I will post less. We already talked about that grading. We already talked about one more assignments, and we already had a look of the office hours. So those were the big things that I wanted to mention, just to make sure that everyone feels comfortable, everyone's kind of good with what to expect of this course and how it works. Like I said, I am very relaxed when it comes to understanding that you have other lives, you have other things to do. So again, if you miss a due date, it's not end of the world. If you just reach out to me, I'll work with you as much as I can. Remember, homework is what I'm asking you to do, but it doesn't mean that if you don't do every single homework assignment that you would be in trouble. You are grown-up people. You choose how you're gonna navigate. You can manage your own workload. You'll also see that I'll upload these recordings to the Canvas course, and then I had those additional materials there. These are not required. Like I said, this week we've been working on 2 modules, week 1A and week 1B module. So make sure you do that B as well. Next week, we will only have 1 module. It is review of main concepts that I think you should be already familiar with. So I don't expect that to be too tough. And then the week after that, we'll actually get to the individual systems. So that brings me to the very end that I was going to say. Like I said, I'll upload that concourse syllabus. Does anyone have anything for me that I can do, that I can help with, that I can clarify, anything that would be helpful? If not, that's all I have for tonight. I really appreciate that you joined me. Like I said, I'll try to make sure that I upload you extra credit for being present here today. I typically put them to your discussions, so you'll see some points appearing there. And again, try to not to stress about this course. Try to enjoy the summer as well. And remember that even though this is an asynchronous course, it doesn't mean that I wouldn't be here to help you. I literally do want you to have a good experience. I literally do want to be here to assist you. So never, never, never hesitate to reach out. I've been teaching for a long time. If you have a hard topic, I probably have materials that I haven't shared about it, and we can get you on the right track. So that is all I have. I'm going to stick around if anyone wants to ask questions. Otherwise, thank you again for joining, and I will see you around in an online space, and I'll see you maybe next week.
Thank you so much for all your help today.
Of course, I appreciate you sticking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
You too. Thank you for sticking around. Bye.
Yes.
Perfect. Now I'm just going to stop the recording here. Again, do remember that you can always join me either on these office hours, either on these live online sessions, or just message to me and we'll find a time that works for both of us and we'll figure it out from there. Thank you again. I look forward to a great semester with you. Bye.